left side, on the left. Somebody get out of.
I'll get it grossed out. Okay, then I emailed you, what can we do about the nails? I said, bring outside of there. I said, we don't go back to my grandma.
What's she trying to get?
Good morning. Welcome to our public hearing on strategic waivers. I will first ask our secretary if our notice was posted. She assures me that it has. And I now turn this over to Ms. Laura May.
Good morning, Mr. Moss. Thank you. Good morning, Dr. Watts and board members. This morning's public hearing focuses on the draft performance contract for the strategic waiver school system. This is being covered for our audience here today, as well as our online community members. What we will discuss is the nature of this contract, where we are today in our current contract, and how we move forward with a renewal. And I apologize. Something happened to the presentation. So on this first slide, we are going to cover the definition of the Swiss performance contract. It's defined as a local district that has a performance contract with the State Board of Education that grants flexibility from specific Title 20 laws, State Board of Education rules, and Georgia Department of Education guidelines. The contract does exist between the district and the State Board of Education. Schools and district administration gain flexibility to innovate or be creative in exchange for increased academic accountability as measured by the State Accountability Index, which is the CCRPI, the College and Career Ready Performance Index. With regard to considering the relative advantages and disadvantages of this form of contract, we have financial savings that are gained from the waivers that are requested. There is flexibility afforded to schools to achieve academically and to provide support services. However, if the contract requirements are not met, we could potentially lose those granted flexibility waivers. So that is a very realistic possibility. We also could potentially lose governance over one or more of our schools, depending upon their performance in that bottom 5% of the state when they're failing to meet those state prescribed targets. Federal state compliance rules also apply. We must comply with all federal laws and regulations, so we do not want there to be any misconception that those can be waived. That is not part of the contract. And we must comply with all state laws, rules, and regulations that are not included or specified within the performance contract. With regard to our current Swiss performance contract, I would like to be very clear that the current contract expires on June 30th of 2024. Therefore, on July 1st, 2016 is when this contract was first formally entered into with the State Board of Education. It was initially a 5-year strategic waiver school system performance contract. 2 amendments, however, did occur during the contract period. The first one was due to the significant changes in the State Accountability Index, the CCRPI calculation. Thus, in school year 2017-2018, the Georgia Department of Education required all Swiss performance contracts to be amended with a new baseline year of 2017-18 based on that revised CCRPI calculation. What we would not anticipate is what happened shortly thereafter, and that was the COVID-19 pandemic, which realistically turned our world upside down. Thus, in school year 2019-2020, the pandemic-related disruptions that impacted the Georgia milestones, as well as CCRPI data collections, obviously impacting the various CCRPI indicators, as well as the overall score, required the state to further amend the contract and, in fact, extend it by 2 additional years, which is how we arrive at the current expiration date of June 30th, 2024. Within the Swiss contract, we are prescribed specific years of accountability with regard to the State Accountability Index. So in 2023, the Georgia Department of Education officially eliminated the overall CCRPI score, which is the key accountability component of the Swiss performance contract. Therefore, at that point, what that did to the academic performance component of our current contract is really made that null and void, because it was based on that overall CCRPI score. So on the screen, what you see with regard to the years of accountability within the current contract is how the base year was set. That was set in school year 2015-16. The first target was school year 2017 and 18, and you see how it commences with regard to school year 2023. That's where CCRPI overall score was eliminated. Therefore, the contract academic performance requirements were no longer applicable. Godot requires all Swiss districts to submit their renewal application by May 24, 2024. And I'm sure that most want to know, well, when did the district become aware of this? So there was an initial notification that was provided in February of 2024. And there was a more comprehensive presentation of the expectations, the requirements, and in fact, there's still some yet to be determined that we learned at that meeting, and that occurred on March 8th, 2024. And I want to put that into perspective for everybody, because when we talk about the fact that we had a very abbreviated process and an incredibly short time frame to deliver, that is the reality. So the application itself consists of 2 components, and Appendix A, which regards the specific waivers we are seeking. So Appendix A is the flexibility component of the contract. There are 3 subsections of the waivers that we can request. They fall under academic, financial, and human resources areas. The additional component of the application included a comprehensive list of district schools that are to be included in the Swiss performance contract. Here's where I want to be very specific, that the list includes schools only. Programs are not included because for state accountability purposes, all of those students get mapped back to their zone school. So all students are accounted for per zone school. Furthermore, the charter schools are not part of this list because each of our charter schools enters into its own separate contract with our own board and the State Board of Education. So their contract specifies their requirements, their expectations, and how we hold them accountable. With regard to the performance requirements that we can anticipate in this contract renewal that we are seeking, school targets and measures will be determined by the Georgia Department of Education. We have asked for further information. As of this moment, I unfortunately cannot provide any specifics. Those are yet to come.
Is that coming from GOSA?
That is coming from the Georgia Department of Education.
Yeah, but from,
But yes, there is an implication with regard to GOSA, the Governor's Office of Student
Yeah.
Achievement, because they are the ones that traditionally have set that metric. They are used to one overall indicator. However, there may be multiple options. And if I may,
Please.
there is a slide that presents some of those options. So the options here with regard to the performance measure that is at the discretion of the Georgia Department of Education in collaboration with GOSA would be, and these are all listed in State Board Rule 160-5-1.33, our high school graduation rate, obviously that would apply to our high schools, SAT or ACT performance, GMAS, end of grade, end of course, or a combination therein, advanced placement, or international baccalaureate, both participation and performance data, and any other metric that may be deemed appropriate. So, what has Godot told us? What has the Georgia Department of Education said thus far? This is their exact verbiage. Accountability measures will be aligned with Georgia's approved revised ESSA plan. So we know what that did to the CCRPI is broke it and retains it into its 5 core components. What that means for us specifically, yet to be determined. But we do know, and this is interesting as well, our baseline year is in fact school year 22-23. So this is a contract we're entering in July 1, 2024, but our first targets will be set for this concluding academic year, school year 23-24. So let's resume back on the slide where we were. So baseline, we have to go back to the previous completed academic year. First target year is the current academic year, 23-24. So when we look at the implications of this contract, what happens if we fail to meet our performance targets? What happens to an individual school? What could potentially happen to the district overall? Here, to look at the various sanctions that can be imposed, we have to look first at what does the Georgia Department of Education, Godot, possibly state here, what can they do, versus what can that State Board Rule 160-5-1.33 indicate. So Godot can impose the following sanctions. They can ask for, and this is not an ask where we can say yay or nay, the removal of school personnel. This may include the principal, leadership team, and any other personnel, any other staff whose performance has been determined to be insufficient in producing student achievement gains. Godot can also require us to completely restructure the school's governance arrangement and internal organization. Lastly, at the district level, the district implication is that Godot can modify or remove previously approved flexibility waivers. And that is at their discretion. That would not typically be a negotiation. State Board Rule 160-5-1.33 indicates that a loss of governance can occur if a school is non-compliant as set out in the terms of the contract. Bottom line, they are not meeting the specified targets for that school. That school can be converted to a charter school with a standard charter contract. That school can, in fact, have its operation be given to another deemed successful school system by the state board. And lastly, the state board may opt to, in fact, give operational control of the school to a private entity, a nonprofit organization, or even a for-profit organization. So what is the timeline that we are looking at? So if our draft application is approved and our contract moves forward and is approved by the state board, it will go into effect on July 1, 2024, and it will run until June 30th of 2030. In terms of how we get there, you can see the flurry of activity that has occurred up to this point in time. And realistically, we've had very little time. So we have had all of the necessary meetings. We have pulled together administrative teams in the areas of academics, finance, human resources. We have consulted with our board attorney and all together have arrived at the requested waivers with Dr. Watt's final review and approval. So this public hearing is part of the process. Once we receive feedback from Godot on April 26th, we will have a couple of days to review, provide feedback, and then Mr. Moss, it will come forward to you and the entire board for consideration. So with that, I conclude my presentation.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's start with Dr. Brinkman.
So I'm trying to make this clear. We're going to put this contract forward without knowing what our target is, and then they are immediately going to turn around and use some target that has not been determined to evaluate our school system on this year's data.
Correct.
And then they could immediately say, you haven't met the target, so you're on the first year SIP required plan.
And by immediate, we're realistically looking November, December of this year.
And that doesn't make sense to anybody else around the horseshoe, correct?
Well, remember, in terms of annual performance, we're always utilizing lagging
it's
data. So
yeah.
thus, but yes, in terms of logically, does it make sense that we start July 1, 2024, which is the start of the new year, but we're using metrics based on the concluded year, which was the last year of the previous contract. I completely understand.
And I heard you right, and they have not told you a time when they will actually tell the district and the rest of the state what the target is.
Correct.
Okay.
But as soon as we find out, we will provide a report to the board.
Thank you so much for what you do, because I can't imagine how unnerving that is to develop a plan Thank you for the word, yeah, blindly, yes, that's perfect.
We just have to trust in the process.
Mr. Johnson?
So going through this and all the notes and everything, and I've seen the pros and the cons of this, what a Swiss contract would be.
Yes.
Can you briefly describe what the pros and cons of a traditional district would be and maybe a charter district, just so the public can know as well?
So let me be very clear in terms of, given the abbreviated timeline and process, that choice truly was not afforded to go through the full option process with full consideration, due diligence, ample stakeholder feedback, both with regard to breadth of feedback, but also depth, that qualitative component of feedback. That would realistically require about a 9 to 12 month period of time. We had 6 weeks to provide a draft, and Godot also very clearly, because I use their verbiage intentionally, they said all Swiss districts will be renewing their contract, will be entering a new contract. That was a statement from the Georgia Department of Education. However, with regard to Georgia flexibility options for school systems, there are 3 options. So that's a wonderful question, and definitely should be something that the public is very well aware of. And I definitely invite everybody to please look online at the Georgia Department of Education website for all the specifics. Currently, there are 3 options afforded to all school districts, public school districts. The first is the status quo or traditional option, which upholds all Title 20 requirements. There are no waivers. There's no flexibility. You must adhere to the law exactly. There are only 2 school districts currently who fall under that traditional guideline. And I'd like to point these out because one of them was particularly interesting to me. Webster County only has 405 students. They have 23 teachers, so approximately 18-to-1 student-teacher ratio. So they can meet that state prescribed ratio. The other one is Beaufort City Schools. And Beaufort City Schools has a total student population of 59, so 5,759 students, and they maintain a 19-to-1 student-teacher ratio. So they also fall within the guidelines with no flexibility required. We have almost 36,000 students. Thus, we are one of 130 school districts that opt for the strategic waiver school system. The strategic waiver school system contract requires us to be very mindful and very selective of the waivers that we seek, in that we have to provide ample rationale and justification, and also specify exactly how this will be implemented and why it matters for student achievement. So when we submitted Appendix A, you will see that each waiver provided the rationale. There's rationale provided for each. Each one specifies the implementation and why that benefits our students, our teachers, and the district overall. The last option is the charter system option, not to be confused with being a charter school. This is an entire charter system. 48 school districts currently opt for the charter system. When you look at our neighboring districts, Liberty County relatively recently opted into the charter system. And when you look at our comparable districts in terms of demographics, student numbers, et cetera, Atlanta Public Schools is a charter system. With regard to charter systems, They are allowed literally the maximum flexibility allowed under the law. They cannot waive accountability requirements. They cannot waive federal laws, rules, regulations, or state laws, rules, and regulations that protect students and staff. However, they don't have to justify any of the waivers that we do per se, because they can take any and all. They have the option of waiving anything that is potentially waiving under Title 20 and the applicable state board rule. In context of these charter systems, though, each school now becomes somewhat of a self-governing, autonomous school. Each school must have a local governance board. And those local governance boards do have considerable operational control of that school. That does, in fact, extend to things such as hiring practices. That's a very different model. With regard to pros and cons, when you're looking at the traditional option, could that possibly work for a district like ours? Not without great sacrifice and a lot of hope. And what I mean by that is that we have a national teacher shortage. We have a local teacher shortage, and also both nationally and locally, not unique to this district, let me be very clear, locally, sort of globally locally, we have teachers who are turning away from the profession, correct? Both of those are working against the fact that we would need a tremendous amount of new teachers to satisfy the maximum student-to-teacher ratio that is acceptable under Title 20. That would come at great cost to the district, and to be perfectly honest with you, that's not a feasible or attainable within a couple of years thing to do. We just can't achieve that, no matter how much we try. And we love our teachers. We love our staff. It's just class size in and of itself would have extreme ramifications for us. From the charter perspective, you really have to weigh that sense of autonomy versus that site-based governance team. And then think about your roles and what would happen if the district level board disagrees with the local governance board, because those things do happen. How are those negotiated? Think about the number of schools. Think about some of the challenges with regard to having people serve on those boards that understand what it takes to run a successful school, appreciate the work necessary to have students and teachers be their best each and every single day to achieve those outcomes that we desire for all of our students, to have that quality of life and experience that we want for all of our teachers as well.
Thank you. What now? We're good. Okay. Yeah, so now, if anyone would like to speak on the waivers, you may come forward. Oh, you guys are waiting for the big meeting, aren't you? Okay, so we have no one? Now we'll have more comments from the board.
Well, sorry, I didn't mean to cut off, certainly if there's anyone from the public, but you said a lot, and it's all very informative, but I just want to go back to reiterate, this is our only option. And the state told us, this is our only option, is to pursue the strategic waiver. So I just want to make sure that that is clear.
That is a very fair assessment.
Yeah, in case anyone says, well, why are you doing this if we don't know what the rules are? Because we have no choice. So,
Yes.
thank you.
All right. Yes.
Mr. Johnson he took us down a great trail that I'm sure we could spend a whole day talking about. I was trying real quick to Google what Title 20 in Georgia law states is the class size you would need to have, because you were referencing that to meet the, what was it, teacher traditional plan? What is that?
I'm
Excuse
having,
me.
we're double checking. I believe it's 24-1, but let us double check.
Okay, that's what I was finding.
24-1 is the maximum.
And that, are we
But that's the max.
are we funded QBE to meet 24-1?
That's an interesting question with regard to the recent budget approved by the governor, because for the first time, there is the promise of full QBE funding per exact student numbers. But I think
so-
there's currently a lot
Regardless
of
about
looking
what's,
into what that means.
yeah, but what's gonna happen versus what has been happening, I don't think we've ever been state funded
No,
to
we have
where
not.
we
No,
could
no,
meet
no.
the traditional plan.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
That's-
No,
I
this
just-
would be literally the first time ever that has been fully, in terms of our recent history.
Thank you.
Ms. Hall?
Dr. May, have you
Yes, ma'am.
known of any schools or districts that fell into the situation where they were forced to become charter systems, or any of the penalties that we see here? Are you
I am-
aware of any?
I would have to research that and provide that
Yeah.
information to you with regard to.
Off the top of my
looking-
head, I'm not aware of any
Not in terms
that
of
this has occurred.
locally. When you look at Liberty, that was something, so I had the opportunity approximately a year ago to attend a conference that was intended for charter schools. It sounded like we should be present, LEAs who have charter schools. It turned out to be a meeting of, basically exclusively, I was the only odd person out, of superintendents of charter school systems and administrative staff. And those discussions there were interesting because the superintendent of Liberty County Schools was there, and he talked about the hard decision that they had to make to leave their previous Swiss contract and intentionally convert to a charter system with the hope of finally improving what had been a somewhat stagnant performance pattern consistently across.
County has like 6 schools, right?
15.
15?
I just was, yeah.
15 schools?
That's what I'm looking, that's what I'm thinking.
15 and around 7,500 students or so,
Okay.
I think.
Okay.
So they did it out of?
They did it out of, it was very clear, they wanted to make the decision on their own with their community as opposed to having that decision made for them.
Got it. Dr. Howard Hall?
I have a question. Is Cobb County considered as a charter district?
Not to my knowledge.
Because I know the Marietta schools, I'm trying to think, was that in Cobb County?
Atlanta Public Schools
Oh,
within that,
okay.
they're the ones, yes.
All right.
Okay. All right. There are no speakers?
I want to ask one quick question.
Yes.
Just for clarity, thank you for your presentation first. But secondly, on your presentation, you talked
Yes.
about the charter system. Do you believe that the charter system would be a better system if it was a smaller district? If we were a smaller district, just out of curiosity?
I think there are lots of factors. So to have a successful charter system, you would need a lot of dedicated daily community support and incredibly high levels of engagement across the board. So in that regard, it could potentially work better in a smaller system. Because think about the number of people that would be needed to serve on all of these local boards, and everybody has to be present. Everybody has to be engaged. Everybody has to go through the same professional training. Everybody has to really have their hearts in the right place, not just their minds. I mean, they really have to be passionate about high-quality education, student achievement. And that really does take a cultural commitment on behalf of the entire community. It's not something that just a small group of people can make happen. It truly takes a village in that regard. And I don't like to make trite statements, but in all honesty, in that regard, it truly takes just incredible involvement.
Anyone else? All right. Then with that, we will close this hearing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.